Well, Gary, despite the fact that he lives in Ottawa, is a Quebec City man. He's born at Jeffrey Hill, like a lot of us, and he was a teacher. And after he retired from teaching, he developed a passion for genealogy, and he's written extensively for Société Histoire de Saint-Brigitte de Laval. And but most important, he's an O'Brien. And I know a lot of the O'Briens, Danny O'Brien, and you all remember Jerry O'Brien. He gave us a talk here. Most of the O'Briens were related. I knew Patty O'Brien and Doll O'Brien. One day, Doll O'Brien, she had beautiful white hair and pale blue eyes. If you ever knew her, you'd know what I was talking about. And we're coming out of Mass, and she yells at me, she says, "Joe!" And I said, "Hello, Doll, what's wrong?" She says, "Do you know what Fagabala means?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "It means clear the way in Irish." And she said, "I knew you'd know." And the reason why I'm telling you that is because right now I'm going to Fagabala and leave the floor to Gary to talk to you about St. Brigitte.
Yeah, very nice. Thank you, Joe, for reminding me of Doll. And this is part of this talk tonight, is how it all started. I started with my family, which my father died when I was 6, so I didn't know too much about the O'Briens. We had the parties, Christmas parties at La Citadelle with Mark's father. But, you know, as you grow into teenage years, and then you grow into adult, you know, family kind of goes away, and I lived far away in the Ottawa area, and Hull eventually, and Doll, you know, what I'm doing also, apart from genealogy, is scanning the literally hundreds of pictures of the O'Brien family, and there's quite a few, well, not too many pictures of Doll, but Doll was a special person, but I never really knew her. I didn't even know my father until I spoke to my cousins, Danny, Mark, les Marmettes, les Bélanger. If some of you know Guy and Louis Bélanger, they're cousins, they're O'Briens as well. And that's part of the topic tonight, is that a lot of the Irish are hidden under Bélanger, Giroux, and whatever name. Because in our society, you take the name of the father. But sometimes there's only daughters, so the names go away. So they told me about my father. They knew a lot more about my father than I ever knew, because their mothers or fathers would talk to them about Roger, who was a RCAF veteran, fought in the Second World War, front gunner, and I knew nothing about that. So thanks to also to Jerry, because he was fortunate enough to live a pretty long time, Danny's father. He told me a lot, and he helped me a lot to identify the pictures. So I'm also kind of we have a Facebook page for the O'Brien family where I put up all the pictures, and it's a great way to share with the younger generation, because they have no clue sometimes about where they come from and everything. So I think that's really the important thing. And so I'm going to be talking a lot about people I don't really know, because the St. Brigitte Irish families we're not from St. Brigitte, we're from St. Dunstan. But they didn't stay there very long, so as most Irish. But I just found it a passion to find how it all started. You probably can't read too much, but this just shows that one of the O'Briens who married James O'Brien, who married Mary Power. James O'Brien was the second Irish in my genealogy who came to Canada. He came from the Waterloo settlement. So what is that Waterloo settlement? So, you know, you start looking, and you find out that it's St. Dunstan or Lac Beauport. And so that's how it started. And then Patrick O'Brien, well, then we find out he's from County Waterford. So you see all those names, and it's we're really fortunate to have these records, because they have names of witnesses and whatnot, and that really helps you. And then you see the other names appear, you know, the Dawsons, the Tierneys, the Hurleys. And so these are all records that I started to collect about my own family. And then I realized, oh, who are all these Irish, and where do they come from? And really, that's how it started. So, okay, I'm just gonna, and then I'm working, so I don't really have time, but I take a year off in 2009, 2010, and I go to Lac Beauport and meet this wonderful woman at the Hôtel de Ville there in Lac Beauport. She lets me go through this box of records. And there's this 1835 petition, which I talked about in the last presentation, but I just want to mention it again because that's how it started. And it has all the names, including the Dawsons, if you can see up there, the Gibsons, Rickens, and there's also O'Brien's somewhere, yeah, the last one, Edward O'Brien, John Beattie. So these were the Irish parishioners of Stoneham and Lac Beauport and Sainte Brigitte who petitioned the church in Quebec City to keep Patrick O'Dwyer, who was an Irish priest who was in charge of the parish in Sainte Brigitte, but also he worked at the, of course, later on he worked at the Gros Île. But the petition was to no avail, like happened so many times. He eventually ended up in Ontario and then actually somewhere in the middle of the United States, Indiana or something like that. He had a brother, Lancelot O'Dwyer, who lived for a while in Sainte Brigitte. So that's how we know about Patrick O'Dwyer, because Lancelot had kids and I actually made contact with some of his descendants. And then I go through the family pictures and I see Laval all the time written behind the pictures, 1940s. And that's my grandfather, James O'Brien, and Maria Laperrière, his wife. And there's literally hundreds of pictures taken in Laval by the O'Brien family. So I say there must be a connection then, even though it says St. Dunstan, but they're in St. Brigitte. And there's other family pictures. You see Jerry up there on a picture on the top, on left with Jim, Lillian, Jacqueline, who became Jacqueline Bélanger, Thérèse and Virginia. And that's my father. And I never realized this was actually the Sainte Brigitte Ski Club, or it was called the Montmorency Ski Club, I think. And then when I saw that on the Sainte Brigitte history website, I said, hey, that's, my father was there. So, and then you come upon an article like this mentioning Thérèse and Virginia saving a man from drowning. A very well-known man in Sainte Brigitte, actually, Johnny Goudreau. And so there were quite a few drownings in the Montmorency River, as you can imagine, because in the spring, people wouldn't, I guess, I don't know, they wouldn't be too careful, and the current was probably very, very strong. So, so that triggered it. I mean, I'm going to find out about these Irish in Sainte Brigitte, even though we're not directly related, but as you'll see later, maybe we are. So, where do they come from? So, of course, there's two names in my family. It's the O'Brien and Heafy. And then later on, I found out that the O'Briens were probably from Ballyduff in County Waterford, because he married a Heafy. Heafy is I'm pretty lucky. Heafy is a very, actually a rare name in Ireland. There's a small hamlet called Ballyheafy, just north of Ballyduff. Danny visited Ballyduff a couple of years ago, and I'll be going there in this spring. So I found out that the Hurleys and Tierneys are actually related in the family. So they're from Sainte Brigitte, so there's a connection. And there's a couple of Irish that kind of disappeared, like the Corcoran was actually the first one in Sainte Brigitte. He came in 1822 for sure, because he married in 1822 in Quebec to a French-Canadian woman. And then the Corcoran left Sainte Brigitte pretty early on. They went on to work in the mills we often see pictures of that mill at the feet of the Chute Montmorency. I don't remember the name. Was it Dominion Textile? Yeah, so they went to work there, like probably many Irish from all over, but quite a few Irish from Sainte Brigitte actually went on to move there. So the Corcoran family moved there, Saint Grégoire de Montmorency. And there's still a lot of Corcorans around Quebec City. A few of them became Cochrans, because it's the same name, basically. And the one Irish family that's still present in Lac Beauport is the McDonough family. Even though my cousin lives there, says they call themselves McDonough, so whatever. I still call him McDonough. And then I got this message on the Facebook page from Irish Heritage when Joe announced the conference. And there was this lady saying, don't forget about the Monahans. The Monahans? There's no Monahans in Lac Beauport. There's no Monahans in Sainte Brigitte. What's she talking about? So, yeah, of course. Quick search on BANQ, which is an incredible source of information. Turned out this Leo Monahan was a big shot, actually, in Lac Beauport. And so I will mention him, even though he's not part of the Irish who established St. Dunstan and Lac Beauport. There's actually quite a lot written about him in this book, Mon Lac se raconte, on the history of Lac Beauport. And of course, a lot of this book concerns the Irish because it was the Irish who were there first. I'll mention the Scots, like Simon's family also, but anyway, we'll talk about the Irish. So Leo Monahan died in 1969. He was the director of the, what is it called? Anyway, he was a big, important person in Lac Beauport municipality. Urbanist, I don't know if you called it urbanist back then, but he was there from 1947 to 1969. So there's quite a few pages. There's a picture of him here. So I'll make sure to take a picture of this and share it on the page so that the Monahan descendants can see that I did mention them, even though it's not really technically part of my family. There's also a Fleming. The Fleming presence is still there, but there's no Flemings left. But you can rent a really nice cottage called the Fleming on Chemin Fleming. So that's right at the border between Lac Beauport and Sainte Brigitte. And if you probably can't see it, but there's a road called Chemin Fleming, and there's also a road called Chemin La Traverse. This is not the road that you usually take between Lac Beauport and Sainte Brigitte. It's a road that's further up north. And I think it was really important for the Irish because the church was in Sainte Brigitte. So whenever there was a baptism in St. Dunstan, they had to go to Sainte Brigitte. And they probably used that road. In the winter, it must have been rather easy to use. And I guess when there was a baptism in spring, they would probably wait because it must have been horrible back then. So that's one of the traces that we still have of the Irish in St. Dunstan, right on the border between Sainte Brigitte and Lac Beauport. So there were a few families that I'll mention later that were in both communities. Now, I just put up the little excerpt from the Quebec Gazette saying that it just mentions that Archibald Simons bought the seigneurie of St. Dunstan at one point, which belonged to the Duchesne family. Lac Beauport used to be called Lac Duchesne. And he just wanted to assert that he owns all the lakes. So if you take one fish out of that lake, it's mine. But it's interesting to know that one of the lakes was called Berryman Lake. And that's, I believe, if I'm not wrong, it's Lac Bleu today in the north of Lac Beauport. So just a little, I'll mention the Scots because you'll see why at the end. So this is a map of, yeah, you can't really see that well. I'll just skip that map. I think I put the wrong map up. Anyway, okay, this is the one I wanted to talk about. So this is on one side you had Sainte Brigitte de Laval, which was part of the L'Ange Gardien parish. Okay, so all the ranges, les rangs, when they attributed them to the Irish in Sainte Brigitte de Laval, it was originally the L'Ange Gardien, okay, rang 1, rang 2, L'Ange Gardien, etc. Whereas in Saint Dunstan, Lac Beauport, it was just north of Charlebourg, and was part of the Notre-Dame des Anges Seigneurie. So the seigneurs were not the same. In Laval, Sainte Brigitte de Laval was the seminary. Whereas in Saint Dunstan, as I mentioned before, it was the Duchesne family. So the land there was like, as you can see, there was no one there. Of course, First Nations lived there. They used paths, which were used by the Irish to travel between, one of the persons in the Société d'Histoire Saint-Brigitte de Laval mention it. The paths were developed by the First Nations, and like the Chemin la Traverse probably corresponded to one of the paths that were used by the Wendats or the Inus when they went to and fro and for hunting or whatever, and trading. So Waterloo settlement was a big thing for the British. Waterloo was a big thing for the British, not necessarily for the Irish. So the owners of Waterloo settlement were mostly British merchants or British Canadian merchants like Peter Langlois, who had a lot of money, and they wanted to sell some of the lots. And so there's a couple of excerpts you can find on the different websites. Now this is an interesting one because it mentions, it's from the 1860s. And it's really, really specific because it mentions a number of families living in both communities. So Saint Brigitte de Laval was mostly Irish at first. It was actually 100% Irish at first. And there was one or two head of families who were Protestant. But it does mention that they renounce their, what's it called, their heresy, right? And so there were practically no Protestants living in Saint Brigitte de Laval. It was Irish and then became gradually French-Canadian. Whereas in St. Dunstan, we have a really diverse community. We have quite a few Irish. And then you had the Scots and what it called, there's actually, at one point there's a bit of confusion whether they're Irish or Scot, but they were Protestants. Because if you look at the history of Ireland, a lot of the Protestants in Northern Ireland were actually came from Scotland or even England. So it's kind of confusing in some of the census that we get from 1841, 1871, 1891, etc. So basically you had like 1/3 Irish Catholics, roughly 1/3 to nearly half were Scots or English or Northern Irish Protestants, and you had a few French Canadians. Really not many in St. Dunstan for a while. So that just mentions some of the information. And school was not a big thing. I'll mention schools a bit later on, but it was kind of difficult to be schooled. It is mentioned that the Irish, most of the Irish knew how to read and write, but not the French Canadians. And since the school was in the south of Saint Brigitte, near what is we call Dawsontown later on, a lot of them didn't go there. So in 1825, these are the names that appear on the census, and the names are really, somebody was talking about new, intelligent, artificial intelligence that could help to decipher some of the names, and that would probably help along sometime. Names are really difficult to read sometimes on census, but Thomas Latchin, I don't know, that could be Lannan. McInnes, that was an Irish name, they left. Comerford was one of the first to come. He left. McInnes, they left. Scully, the Scully family was one of the first in St. Dunstan. They left as well, but they went to the Beauce area. And there's actually quite a few descendants of the Scully family in the St. Marie de Beauce area and all over there. They probably joined with the Frampton Irish. And you see a lot of names that are obviously either English or Scottish, like Ellifrich, Cockney, Humble, Frost, and one French Canadian there, Baptiste Verrette, and the other one, Antoine Compagnie. Hard to figure what the name actually was, but it's probably not the right name. So 1825 then was the first really list of people who lived in the Waterloo settlement. Saint Brigitte is not established yet. That'll wait a few years. Okay, so this is the 1842, and I just want to mention it because of the first person, William Shadgett, who's going to play an important role. I mentioned him 6 years ago when I came here, so I'll be very brief about him. But he was kind of a dreamer. he wanted to establish an agricultural college in Lac Beauport. Kind of a, well, you know, 19th century was full of idealism. All kind of ideas came about to make society progress and everything. So William Shadgett had this idea that we establish an agricultural college, people will be really the best farmers in the world, and, well, to make a story short, yeah, nothing came out of it. William Shadgett moved on in the US. He became a physician, what's it called? A special kind of hydropathic physician or something like that. Anyway, that's what it says on the census. So I don't know, anybody could be a physician back there. So basically he had no descendant left, and he went to the US. But William Shadgett was actually the agent for the seigneurie. He was the one who was selling the location tickets for Waterloo Settlement. So we don't know what happened. Did he make a lot of money? Did he lose money? Anyway, he left very shortly after that. His son, William Shadgett, died in 1834 in Quebec City, and he left right away after that. So we could put someone in that case, but I don't know. So there's a couple of Irish names again here, the Scullys, the Temples, they are Catholic Romain, so they are the Irish Catholics. You have the Murphys, Thomas Johnmans, again, that's a name, I don't know what it means, but you have a couple more names like Gleason, Mooney, and a lot of English names. So St. Dunstan was very diverse. You have a couple of Maguires again, and we have James Lannon, number 41, James Lannon. We'll talk about him later. We'll mention him again. James Lannon, he's a very well-known name. And number 57, Thomas Kavanagh. Thomas Kavanagh was a very important figure. He seems to be at all the marriages, at all the baptism. He's mentioned all the time. His name is actually Tobias and not Thomas, but this person who was making the census probably just, you know, they wrote whatever they heard. So it's a very important family, but they all left eventually. And they ended up in Ile Jésus, which was not called Laval back then. And when they opened up the Bordeaux prison, that's where I found them later on, the Cavanaghs. So they worked as jailers in Bordeaux prison in what is now Laval. So that was an important family. The Power family, well, that's an important family for us because James Power is the father of Mary Power, who married James O'Brien. And Edward O'Brien is at the last one there. So he was our ancestor from County Waterford. Of course, it was written Brian, but we can figure it's Edmund O'Brien. There's also William Foran that we'll mention again. He also plays a role in the story. So what happened eventually with the Irish? So I put up the numbers according to the census. And so in 1851, Lac Beauport, this is Lac Beauport, it's not St. Brigitte. I'll show you the figures for St. Brigitte later on because they were all done by someone. So you see, it's pretty diverse, like 32% Irish Catholic and about the same number of Irish Protestants, which could include some Scots. French Canadians, hardly any. And in 1851 and 1861, they did put if the wife was Catholic or Irish or the husband or whatever. So there were a couple of mixed couples. Okay, and that kind of disappeared later on in the latter censuses. So you see the number of Irish actually goes up from year to year because they have kids. So what I'm counting here is not households, but number of people. So the fact that they have a lot of kids means that their population goes up to 36%. And then it even goes up to close to 40% in 1881, which is interesting because the opposite happens in St. Brigitte. Okay? And now we don't have the Irish wife and Irish husband differentiation anymore. They're all mingled up. And then even the English and Scottish, Sometimes they're referred to as English, sometimes as Scottish, so it's kind of confusing. Or if they're practiced the Church of England, well, we don't know if they're Scottish or English. So. But it's just, I just want to look at the figures for the Irish. And then 1901, they have a lot of kids. A few families move in, but you see, number of families only moves up by 2, so 18 to 20 families. But they have a lot of kids. And the kids survive. That's the other important thing. So I guess conditions weren't too bad, and a few people came over. But what is interesting to look at is the population of Lac Beauport itself goes down. So a lot of the English and Scots leave on eventually for Ontario and the USA and move on to other places because they realize it's not really a great place for agriculture. Of course, some families become rich because they establish sawmills and they exploit the lumber industry. So the Simons family, for example, will establish sawmills, and that's how they make their initial money before starting the stores that we know in Quebec City. And then 1911, we see that French-Canadian population doesn't go up very much, which is kind of surprising because if you look at Lac Beauport today, it's like, I think, almost 100% French-Canadian. So it's really become a suburb of Quebec City. Then 1921, again, we see the Irish population still pretty high at 25%. But then 1945, I used the voters list, so that doesn't give us the number of people, only the voters. So it's kind of misleading, but we assume, I assume anyway, that the Irish population was very high because they had a lot of kids, but you know, as they grew older, the kids went on, and the percentage of the population went down because there weren't any kids anymore. And the Irish Protestant practically disappears. And the Scots remain pretty high because we still have the Simons family, the Helifrich family, the Pearson family, and even some new families come in because they probably have connections or whatever, like the Wolfe family. And so that's the situation today, but as we see 62%, then it becomes French-Canadian. And so that's today the situation is that, as I said before, there's hardly any trace or any individuals who are of Irish origin in Lac Beauport. Now, before I go on, I think I put a slide in the wrong order. When I started this before, I mentioned the family, but one person that I forgot to mention was Marion O'Gallagher. She's the one I went to first when I started this. And I asked her, I sent her an email. I didn't meet her. I didn't have a chance to meet her. But I sent her an email saying, do you know anything about these St. Brigitte Irish? Like, who are they? What is that? They keep coming up in my genealogy. And she mentioned that she knew about them, but not too much. And she encouraged me to go and find out. And she mentioned that there was a cemetery that had been kind of leveled or asphalted over, or I don't know what happened, but it is a fact that the old St. Brigitte Cemetery is there no longer. And there were quite a few burials starting in the 1830s, so, but there's none left. So, yeah, so that's how it started. And then I remember sending her a letter and saying, oh, I'm going to be in Quebec City sometime, I think it was in the spring, right, that she left us? And I said, I'll be there in the summer, can we meet? And she said, yeah, sure, but as you know, well, she left us, but I owe many thanks to her, even though I didn't get a chance to actually meet. She told me, go and find out. But there's another sister that came along. She's been gone a long time ago. Sœur Marie-Ursule Sans-Chagrin from St. Brigitte de Laval, who was actually an American. She lived in Minnesota, St. Paul, and she did her thesis on, I'll show the book later on, Civilisation traditionnelle des Lavallois, and it's an incredible book, and it's free. It's on BINQ. It's rich, incredibly rich. It's a perfect example of what ethnographical studies is all about. She went to interview everyone there, and I'll show you a few excerpts. And this is a table she made up of the population in St. Brigitte. Now, the only thing is that she didn't really take into account the individuals. So the 1% of Irish in 1941 is probably too low. It doesn't make sense because there were still quite a few left. So I don't know if she's counting only the households, head of the family, or the actual people. But I mean, the table by itself speaks very clearly about the slow decline of the Irish population in Beauport, in Saint Brigitte de Laval. And the French Canadians who moved there came from Saint-Roch, Saint-Féréol, Beauport, and they went to cultivate the land, but mostly to work in the forest industry, because that was the basis of the economy at Saint Brigitte. There was not much agriculture there. So Laval was not, as you see, it's French-Irish. There's nobody else. Well, there's actually one Jersey family, Le Rossignol, which is a pretty important family actually in St. Brigitte. And there was one guy called Brown. There's two Browns family in St. Brigitte. One is Irish, Brown. The one is Brown, but it was originally B-R-A-U-N, so they're distantly German. So that's St. Brigitte. And 1949, these are the last Irish names that we have in the voters list. Now, a voters list is not perfect because a voter might be registered there but not really living there, and vice versa. But I mean, if we look at the 1949 voters list, we still have a few Dawsons. We have Madame John Dickey, and I'm not sure which family it is, so some people may have come in later, you know. And we have a couple of Jennings, Keogh. So these three families are still present today in St. Brigitte. But like I said, there's a lot of hidden Irish under the name of Valliere, especially Valliere. One of the pictures I showed includes a lot of Valliere, because one of the Dawson daughters married Albert Valliere, who was also another important figure in St. Brigitte, because you may know about Moulin Valliere, which was at the bottom south of St. Brigitte, an important sawmill there, which burned sometime, can't remember when, but anyway. Goudreau, I mentioned before, Giroux, so these are all Irish descendants because we don't keep the name when it's the daughter who marries. So as I mentioned, Marie-Ursule came, and then I decided to make up this website, which some of you may have consulted. So there I try to put as much information as I can on the Irish families, but it's a Wix website, and it's a free version, so right now I'm limited. I can't add anything anymore. So I'm going to have to sort of fiddle around with it, but I'll explain more on that later. Okay, so that's the book. If you have a chance, go and read through it. It's really well done, and it's from 1951. And I mean, it's a great book, Marie-Ursule Sans Chagrin. And the link is here. If you don't know Bibliothèque et Archives Nationales du Québec, you got to know it. It's incredible. You can search, put the name of your grandfather. Like I found about 15 articles about my own father, Roger O'Brien, during the war. Of course, what helped is that James, his father, worked for the Quebec Chronicle Telegraph, so that kind of explains it a bit. So you may not find as many articles, but it's incredible what you can find sometimes. And you have to fiddle around with the dates sometimes, because if you look for a Dawson, for example, well, there's quite a few of them all over the continent. So you can fiddle around with the dates if you want to find when somebody died exactly. And then if you can find the obituary, it's really useful because you get the names of all the children, where they live, and everything else. So Bibliothèque et Archives Nationales. Now, since this will all be posted on the website, you can go and check it later. Okay, so Marie-Ursule Sans Chagrin did incredible work. So she found out who were all the first Irish who got to settle into what was called, and this name only appears once in my research. It only appears in an 1834 map, the Tipperary settlement, which is in the south of St. Brigitte and corresponds also to where Dawson Town would be eventually. So she listed all the names of the Irish who got land there from the Séminaire de Québec. And I don't know why, but it's only in 1858 that the documents come out. These actes notarial acts come out in 1858 to confirm these deals. So John O'Shea was one of the first. Now, okay, yeah, I wrote some notes, but they're a bit too small to read for you. But John O'Shea, he's actually related, we were talking about that with Mr. Griffin, he's related with the Sainte Catherine de la Jacques-Cartier families. So originally he got land in the Tipperary settlement, and then some time, I didn't follow him because I was really focusing on Sainte Brigitte. He moved on to Sainte Catherine de Portneuf, Sainte Catherine de Jacques-Cartier, whatever you want to call it. And so that is one of the founders of the Sainte Catherine community. Thomas Fleming. So Fleming is still there. That's the Fleming that we talked about. Well, he's there, but he's not there. There's Fleming still in Quebec City. Slide before, forgot to mention, I saw 3 Flemings in the Quebec City directory, so they're probably related. Thomas Dunn, never found what happened to him. Michael Hanley, no clue. Philip Quinn. Philip Quinn is mentioned a lot, but I can't pinpoint where exactly he went. So James Britton. James Britton, well, I know who he is because he married an O'Brien. But, and then they disappeared. Britton can be written different ways. And then if you write it B-R-E-T-O-N, then you get all the Bretons in Quebec. So it's kind of difficult to find out where they went. Patrick Dooley, well, he may be related, he may be actually Daly, who eventually settled in Valcartier. So a lot of the families here also settled in Valcartier. And when I say Valcartier, I mean Saint-Gabriel, Valcartier, not Shannon. Saint-Gabriel de Valcartier, which also has a strong Irish community and also very diverse, Scott and English. James Gilani, never found that name anywhere, so I don't know. It could be wrongly written, or I don't know. And then we had the Corden brothers, Richard and Thomas Corden, and then again, no clue what happened to them. Matthew Enright, he was there for a long time, and then they moved on. John Farley, no clue. William Foran. William Foran will come into our story because he's related with the Berryman family, which we'll talk about later. Joseph and his brother, he had a brother, Francis Hallinan. Hallinan, I found Hallinan all over the place in Quebec City, but they lived in the city. So some of them probably got land from the Séminaire and then rented it out to other people. So I think that's the case for the Hallinan family. And we see again Tobias Kavanagh here. John O'Brien, no relation actually. This John O'Brien was from County Wexford, and his descendants all live in New Hampshire today. So he was mayor of St. Brigitte for a while actually. The Boland family is also a very important family, sometimes written Boylan or Boland with a D, and most of them again are in New Hampshire or even Montana, North Dakota, California, everywhere. Hackett, no. The Lawler, they were from Kilkenny, and some of them married with the Bolans and moved on to New Hampshire. And then we have the Fleming again. And Dennis Salmon family, sometimes it's written Salmon with no L. They were from Saint-Gabriel de Valcartier as well. So some of them got land in St. Brigitte, but then they eventually moved up north, or northwest, Saint-Gabriel. So I'm not going to go through the list, but it's just to show that Sister Marie Ursule made the list, a detailed list of all the people who got land from the Séminaire to establish themselves in Sainte Brigitte de Laval. Now, in 1825, now again, I'm not going to read all this, but it's for your benefit if you want to read it further on. William Shadgett was asked to appear before a kind of a summons about what's happening to the lands which used to belong to the Jesuits. Oh yeah, that's one thing I forgot to mention, is that all these lands that became the Seigneurie de Notre-Dame des Anges was Jesuit land. And of course, when the British took over Quebec, well, North America, the Jesuits were gone. So all their land was taken, and it became property of Narcisse Chénet, who hired Mr. William Shadgett. It's just interesting to mention that his idea is really to establish only English immigrants. It's Old French as well. Les émigrés anglois. Anglois was the old, well, the O and A in French, if some of you know about language, a bit etymology is mixed up. And it's just interesting to see that he was really interested only in some like English, maybe Scottish immigrants with money, with capital. He mentions it. But then they say, how about those people who had no capital? Oh, we took some of them, even if they couldn't pay. But then they had to work. So we can assume that they had to work in the lumber industry for those who had the capital. So that's probably why there was a lot of movement, you know, to and fro, like coming to work in Lac-Beauport, leaving, coming back. And so it just underlines that in Lac-Beauport, there was a lot of capital involved. So it's probably why some people, some of the Irish, some of the Scots stayed longer, because it was, I don't know if we could say it was prosperous, but there was something going on. Whereas in Sainte Brigitte, it was so-and-so. So it's just an interesting, it's very, very long actually. It's a very long testimonial by William Shadgett, and it seems like he's trying to justify what he was doing, but anyway, I don't want to go too much into that. Okay, the mayors. So these are the mayors of Sainte Brigitte and Saint Dunstan. So we see John O'Brien, I talked about. Thomas, oops, sorry, there's Thomas, it's Thomas Murphy. It's a bit of a mishap in the columns there. John MacDonald. John Dawson was mayor 3 times. William J. Dawson, which probably means son of John. Yeah, the Williams and the John Dawsons. Yeah, they gave me a lot of trouble. Which one is which? And you'll see something later on about that. William Brown, and then Jeremiah Turney, who was also a pretty important member of the community, sometimes called Jerry Tierney, of course. And then in Lac-Beauport, you had John Murphy twice. Thomas Patrick Fleming was also mayor for a long time. So that's why he's got a road named after him, I guess. So, and you may notice that the Jerseyan fellow Jean Le Rossignol was also a mayor for a while. And John Boylan. John, I think I did something to that text there. Anyway, okay. So Thomas Patrick Fleming, he was mayor, oh boy, okay, it's not very clear. Anyway, he died at 80. He was a mayor for a long time in Sainte Brigitte. There's an article in Lac-Beauport, sorry. He's mentioned, of course, in the newspapers quite a few times. There's this kind of an interesting story, because that brings me back to Mr. Griffin, who lived in Shannon for a while. So some of the, when they built the base, I remember you talking about the base, Valcartier base a while ago, last year. So one of his daughters, Hazel McKinley, she married a McKinley, was one of the people expropriated from their farm on Rivière-au-Pin when they built the base. And so they went to live in Loretteville, which is my hometown. So there's a connection there as well. So that's Bertha, Veronica, Fleming. So there's still a lot of Flemings left also in Valcartier, because with the marriages of the daughters, some of them became Macoubries, or even Lavalais, which seems to be anglicized here, Irvin Lavalais. So there's still a few of them around, but under, not called Fleming, in other words. Okay, so Sister Marie Ursule collected stories from both English and French-speaking inhabitants in St. Brigitte, and they're really, really, really interesting. And I found this one first. So when my grandfather William Jennings came to Laval, it was as if you went into a bush. It was only a footpath, which I mentioned probably from the time of the First Nations, to go to Beauport. You had to build a camp and everything. She may have been mistaken, because the first Jennings was actually Thomas Jennings, and then his son was William, but it's okay, we can pardon that. So she's mentioned as Mrs. John Boylan, so it's probably Marianne Jennings. But all their descendants are gone now, and maybe that's why, because they figured it's too hard. There's factories down in New Hampshire, there's wood to cut, so we'll go there. Again, I don't know why it's not too clear, but if you want to see that again, all the Jennings here died early. Like all the kids died within 5 years, except for one of them. So it's just an example of, I don't know, it seems that I didn't do an extensive comparison, but it does seem like the kids lived more past their early ages in Beauport and in St. Brigitte, and that may have to do with the conditions in which they lived. So only Ellen survived of this family, of William Jennings and Marianne Quinn, who may be the daughter of the Philip Quinn we talked about. But the whole family moved to Chippewa Falls in Wisconsin, which is actually a place where a lot of them ended up, and you'll see later on why. Chippewa Falls, so that's connection with St. Brigitte, Laval Irish families. And some of their distant cousins are Dennis and Donald. So you can go visit family there if you want. Okay, again here, I put it up there so you can read on your own after, because there's so many stories. But she mentions the two schools. There was one English school, one French school. That went out for a long time, until the 1940s. And as I said before, she also talks about what were the relations between the French and the Irish. And she says, she mentioned that they were very good. They had party together, and they played music together. I mean, they were both Catholic tradition, so, and there were a lot of marriages as well, so it seemed to be not an issue at all. But she does mention that the French-Canadian kids didn't really go to school because it was too far for them, because they lived mostly up the river, and the school was further down. And yeah, John Early is mentioned here. So, so these are the stories, that maybe you have heard from your grandfathers or grandfathers about Feu Follet and things like that. So he got down, made the sign of the cross on the horses' foreheads. They came to the top of the hill. There was this flash of lightning. Mr. Hurley saw an old woman with a big black pig alongside of her. I don't know. Maybe he had a few drinks, but but anyway, these are the kind of stories that people would tell Sister Marie Ursule, and it's interesting to note that some of the stories are pretty similar in French and English. Les Feux Follets, so of course that's also another tradition in the Irish, and again another one. So it's interesting to see that in her book, she does incorporate the stories, the memories of the Irish. Now, Tom Ryan and his wife lived in the deuxième rang. So I find it's interesting because he probably mixed the languages like we do here in Quebec City. Well, you here in Irish, the Irish here in Quebec City. So there we go. So there was how to get the So they blamed the Mrs. Hurley. My father went to see an old fairy woman, so an old fairy woman would solve the problem. She gave him 5-cent piece, told him to put it in the churn, and also told him to get a coulter. And I'm not sure what a coulter is. So it's a reference to agriculture somewhere. And put it in the stove. As it got hotter and hotter, she came in and went to the stove as if to light her pipe. You see, the person who has thrown a curse suffers from the heat. So she had thrown the curse, and then by touching the coulter, the curse was lifted. So anyway, these kind of... Okay, an interesting mention of someone who went back to Ireland. This I found interesting because it mentions somebody came and then her husband died and she went back to Ireland. I wonder if this actually happened. I found it kind of not really plausible, but could it have happened? I don't know. So again, there was a question of lifting a curse here, and it involved a Mike Dawson. But which Michael Dawson was that? I don't know. There were quite a few ones, and even Jim Dawson. So it's not like today where, parents name their kids Ocean or whatever. Back then it was Jim, Mike, and William. Okay. All right, so this is where we go in with the nicknames. Pat Keogh. Patrick Whaley. That's a mistake. It's Whalen. Patrick Whalen was another family. Sometimes called Phelan. Whalen, Phelan is the same. So there was Patty, there was Black Patty, there was Red Patty, there was Squirrely Patty. Now, I don't know which one is which, but there were three or four Patrick Whalens. And William Dawsons. Well, there was William John, who was probably the son of John. So this one is kind of easy to figure. But then you had Black Billy, and Big Billy, and Billy the Bear. Now, Billy the Bear, I think, is the one who lived with his mother, so it's probably the son, because there is one, William Dawson, who died in 1936, single without marrying, and he lived with his mother. I think she was Sarah Keogh. I'm not sure, but anyway, so that's probably him, Billy the Bear. And also for the French Canadians were not any better in naming their kids, Francis Thomas, Thomasin. Joseph Thomasin, Joseph Thomasin, Joseph Thomasin from generation to generation. So it was pretty much the same. So Billy the Bear, I probably pinned him down to the William Dawson, who died in 1936. Of course, leaving no descendant. Now there was a few places names also. Big Billy's Mountain. So another Dawson there. La Montagne chez White. It's interesting because White, I didn't really find that name White, but there was a William White who married Roseanne Quinn, but he was from Frampton, so that's the only case I found of a Frampton Irish who came to St. Brigitte. They married in Quebec City, but how they met, I don't know. They met somewhere close to the river, and then they moved to St. Brigitte de Laval for a while. Not long, but long enough to have a mountain named after him. So, and the one I found really interesting is now Côte à Knox is another one that I can't explain because there were no Knoxes there. But Dinner Hill is the one I find really interesting because it's the place when they would travel from St. Brigitte to Lac Beauport. It's a place up on the hill where they would stop and have lunch. So it's really kind of a significant name too. It's really nice to have that in our memory, to remember that they would travel a lot. There was actually a specific place where they would stop, and I don't know, maybe we can suppose they hid a bottle of whiskey somewhere under a rock. So if you go there today, maybe, I don't know, you can find some really old whiskey. I don't know. And then there's the Welsh, Monté chez Welsh. Now the Welsh give me a lot of problems too, because sometimes it's Walsh, and then Walsh. So many Walsh. So of course when our dear friend who was also Marshal a couple of years ago, Bob Walsh, was mentioned a couple of years ago, of course I did a fast research on Bob Walsh, but he's not related to the Walsh family in St. Brigitte. He's from Quebec City. I do have his family tree though. And Okay, so a couple of roads. So the Hurley Road, somebody mentioned a lot of the names were changed recently for political circumstances. So of course Hurley Road, O'Neill Road has disappeared. The Heafy Road, I think, has disappeared as well. They named the Dawson Road, which is not really close to where the Dawsons live, but so a lot of names have disappeared. And well, that's life. And there's also the Devil's Bit, which was a ravine. And there's a little story here that I didn't transcribe. So, of course, there's always the devil involved somewhere when the Irish are there. Okay, now she mentions in 1940s and 50s when she wrote the book, these were the Irish that she saw, that she met. Okay, so William Kenny died in 1896. He sold his land to Edouard Sans Chagrin. Bill Tierney left for Quebec City where he died. No descendant. He left his land to William John, which we mentioned before, Billy the Bear. John Nicholson. We don't know what happened to him exactly, but he had one son. He sold his land to the Keoghs, and the Keoghs are still in St. Brigitte de Laval. John McDonald was from County Waterford, and he's kind of related to me because he married a Heafy, but he sold his land to Octave Gosselin, so that trace is gone. Pat Whalen, one of the Patrick Whalens, I don't know which one, Squirrely or whatever. He married Margaret Fardy, died in 1916, no descendants stayed on the land. So she just mentions that to say that once the landowner or the first owner or the second owner died or left, no Irish really took over the land, except for Dawson and Kehoe. Ned Early, Edward Early, was probably the husband of Margaret Boland. He died in 1894, but the family moved on to New Hampshire. Patsy Dawson, not sure which one, but he's the grandfather of Leopold Dawson, who stayed in St. Brigitte de Laval very long, had a house up on the hill going to St. Brigitte, and he's related to Michael Dawson, who lives in Gatineau actually, and was a member of the Société d'Histoire de St. Brigitte de Laval as well. And I believe his house is still there. Tom White, son of the aforementioned William, he moved to Ontario, and William Stapleton, well, they moved to Limoilou, so there's a couple of people in Limoilou still, but there's a lot of Hogans that are related to the St. Brigitte families. Excuse me. I forgot to bring my water bottle. Is there somebody bring me a glass of water? I think I'm gonna. That's one detail I forgot. When you're a teacher, you always have your water bottle beside you, and you have to refill it about 3-4 times. I forgot that. Okay, so many lots had been cultivated during the 1840s, 1850s, 1880s, and then when all these people left, it all went back to the forest. So this map, 1979, showed that St. Brigitte is now was then mostly forested. And I mean, all the lots that were handed out, well, to start with, not much of it was cultivated, and when they left, it was just left for the trees to grow back up. So what's really, oh, thanks a lot, Joe. Thanks. So what's really interesting is that I'm a member of the Société d'Histoire St. Brigitte de Laval, and one of the members of the council there, Marc Gadoury, is really involved in the archaeological issue. And for example, the Heafy farm, the Berryman farm, they just left stuff there all over the place. You know, whether it be a small nail or a bicycle, they even found a bicycle, or agricultural tools, whatever. And it's right there in the forest. So of course what's happening right now is that all these lands are being developed because St. Brigitte is now a suburb of Quebec City, and there's a lot of development going on. So they're asking the developers, the citizens, to check when they dig. If they find something, to report it and to show it and take pictures and all that, because it's another way to keep our memory, to know what people lived like, and so it's really interesting. A lot of finds have been done in St. Brigitte, and it's an ongoing story. And of course, you know, you want development to go on, you know, want people to have houses, but it's nice to be careful, you know, when you dig. You know, if you see something, report it, please. It's really like it's kind of legal to have to do that, but of course, if people find something just throw it away, you never know. So it's one of the issues that the Société d'Histoire is trying to raise awareness about in St. Brigitte, because of course most people who live there have no relation at all with the first peoples who lived there, except for the Thomasin, the Clavet, the Fortier, but the other families have. So it's actually very nice what's happening there in St. Brigitte, because another member of the Société is a teacher, and she wants to get the students involved and to know about the history of their place, which is really nice. And I'll be going there in October to give a conference on the same subject in French, so it's good. So this is 1844. So there's not a lot of cultivation going on. It's oat. It's interesting though, they have a lot of sugar maple. And but you can see all these all this information. The 1851 census and the 1871 census gives detailed information about what each farmer produced on his land, or made. For example, a woolen material and everything. Oh, this is, I found a really rare occurrence, because a woman asked for separation. This is, oh, I forgot to put the date, 1868. So Mary Whalen married to William Dawson, who, we don't know what happened, but she asked for separation. So 1868, so that's why I really, you know, took note of it, because it's a rare occurrence. And then she moved on and married somebody else in New York City, along with her daughter. And William Dawson, well, this William Dawson, we don't know what happened to him, because there's a lot of William Dawsons, not just in St. Brigitte. So this is kind of interesting. So just to backtrack a bit, when I started all this, I met Alan Dawson, who's created the Société d'Histoire de St. Brigitte de Laval. And he told me about this Dawson descendant from, I can't remember where. She came to St. Brigitte de Laval and wanted to find out about her family, so that's how he got the idea to start the Société d'Histoire. And she told him, oh yeah, I went to Ireland, I went to Tipperary, and they told me that William Dawson and Catherine Broderick, they eloped from Ireland. She was in a monastery to become a nun. He was bringing the fish from his boat to the monastery, and they fell in love. And then they went to the harbor and eloped on the ship because their family didn't want them together. And I said, yeah, those Irish with their stories, they're so funny. Can you imagine in a pub after ours? You know what we told this woman? What? Oh, you will remember, listen to what I told this woman about that. So it's like, when I heard that, I said, yeah, sure. And when you find out the history, it's like, yeah, doesn't make any sense. Because what I did is I went through the records, and we are extremely, extremely fortunate. I'm going to go rapidly through these because it's very hard to read, very, very hard to read. We are extremely fortunate because a lot of the records from Tipperary area, from where they came from, which is central Tipperary near Templemore. If you know a bit about Ireland, Limerick on the coast is in Limerick County, but it's close to, I'll show a map later. It's close to Tipperary, so it's like due east of Limerick. So it's kind of southwest of Ireland, okay? But there's no towns, it's all hamlets or villages. So what I wanted to do was, okay, this story is really far-fetched, so let's find the history. And what I did find is that they all came together. The Dawsons, the Brodericks, the Tierneys, the Bolans, the Phalans, and everybody came together. So there was no elopement at all. So the first record I found was John Boland, born in 1789. So I took note of all the communities. and then try to connect them. Patrick O'Neill married Mary Burns in Kilkenny. So there were two main areas from where the St. Brigitte people came from, Tipperary and Kilkenny. Patrick Dawson was born in 1792 of William and Catherine Broderick. So this may be the Patrick Dawson she was talking about that he wrote. James Rocket. The Rocket family I won't mention very much because they left 0 descendant. The sons didn't marry, and I'm not sure all the details, but there's no descendant of the Rockets at all. County Waterford. Patrick Tierney, Templemore, Tipperary. Darby. Darby is I found out was a nickname for Jeremiah. Mount Frisco. So you really have to search for Mount Frisco in Ireland. It's not a place. It's just somewhere, a stone on a crossroads. Catherine Dawson, Turin, Tipperary. So you kind of figure that, okay, they're all related, but they seem to be moving around a bit. Garrett's Mills. So three Tierneys here are born in Garrett's Mill. Again, it's not a village. It's a hamlet. Kilcommon. Kilcommon is the one name that will come up a lot. Stapletons, Dawson, and Newport. Newport is close to the Limerick border. Michael Foran. And Palace. You have Palace, Central South Palace, that is close to Borrisoleigh. Same areas, Kilcommon, Templemore. Garan, near Templemore. So you have all these names, and you really have to look for them because it's not easy to read. This one is kind of easier to read. August, the birth of Anne Tierney in Lloydborough, another place. Lloydborough, actually I found a Lloydborough. There's a place called Lloydborough. It's a huge mansion that is for sale. That was for sale at least last year. So if you want to go and buy it, it's for sale. There's nothing around it. So that gave me the clue that, okay, they were all agricultural workers migrating from one place to another. Because Lloydborough is a mansion owned by a Protestant family. Now, I'm not going to go into the history of the land tenures and the Irish Catholic emancipation and all that, but 1820s, 1830s, Catholic emancipation happened, so Catholics were able to own land, but it was like a bit like slavery in the US. It was a long process until Catholics were able to establish the same equal rights as the Protestants in Ireland. So that's a long story, but aside from that, there were a lot of turmoil and violence at that time in Tipperary and all the other counties around there. So anyway, just to make it short, I realized that, okay, they're moving from place to place. Garrett's Mill, Templemore, Kilcommon. So they're finding work on these mansions. And Lloydborough is one that is still there. It's a huge mansion. And so it was probably where these agricultural workers went to find work. And sometimes, like in the Tierneys we saw, they were able to have 3 kids within 6 years in the same place. But sometimes you can see that births, or baptism actually, happen in different places. Oops, sorry, Corcoran. Okay, now the first occurrence in Quebec, 1822, as I said, Thomas Corcoran, married Marie-Louise Binet. So he's the first one I find arriving here. Now, he's not the one who's responsible for bringing everyone, because he's not related to the Dawsons or Tierneys, but just interesting to note, he's the first one to settle in Tipperary settlement, because he knew about it. He was a shoemaker. He got land in St. Brigitte, didn't like it very much, I think, so his sons went to work in St. Grégoire eventually. Darby Dawson, Bellaclave, another name. So you see they move around. Kilnagrana. It's a lot of work to decipher this. You have to go and look at the old townlands map. Luckily, a lot of it's on the internet, and try to figure, okay, Kilna. Okay, try to find a place that starts with Kilna in County Tipperary, and then you can, anyways, it's a lot of fun. 1828, okay, now one of the first Tipperary settlers 1828 in Quebec. So Edward Hurley and Mary Sheen, Notre-Dame de Quebec. But he's not from Tipperary, he's from Waterford. Or Wexford, sorry. Did he know that the Tipperary people? Probably not, but Hurley was one of the first ones to marry in Quebec City. 1829, Michael Gibson and Mary O'Connell married in Waterford. That's the bottom here. Not in Waterford. That's in Quebec City. Sorry about that. He's from Waterford. They married in Quebec City. Sorry. 1829. So you see, the Waterford people seem to have come before, and that's why we find them in St. Dunstan, which was established before St. Brigitte. Ryan Dawson. The Ryans and Dawsons are related. Again, Ballyclave. Okay, Michael Jennings, Notre-Dame de Quebec, 1829. Now, 1831. This is the one that's really interesting because we have no information as to who this person is. It's written William Dasson, a known Irish. Okay. The years match with the first Dawson who came, the husband of Catherine Broderick. He was buried in Charlebourg. So this was before the establishment of St. Brigitte de Laval and St. Dunstan parishes. And Dasson is probably Dawson. So that's our man here. He's here. July. Now in January, the Dawsons are still in Ireland. So did this William Dawson come here first and then sent letters saying life is good, but then died a few days later in July? Maybe. But in January, Mary Ryan Dennis Ryan and Joanna Dawson have a son. But in April 1832, the marriage of Patrick Dawson of the late William Dawson. We just saw William Dawson died in July 1831. So it kind of makes sense here. And they married in Quebec City, April 1832. So they arrived in the summer of 1831, most probably. Or April was kind of early for the ships to cross. So that's really the indication we have. So end of story for the elopement. They all came together. But in 1832, there's still some of them in Ireland. So William Dawson marries Sarah Keogh. So this is an important couple because they'll have a lot of descendants in Beauport, Tipperary. And a year later, they have their first daughter in L'Ange Gardien. So they cross over sometime during the summer of 1832, because I don't think she would have crossed the ocean being pregnant. So they probably crossed in right after they got married in 1832 and have their first daughter in 1833. And then 1834, John Hurley and Mary O'Brien have a daughter in St. Dunstan, baptized in Charlebourg. Funny story here is about Ellen Hurley. She'll go back to Europe, but she married an English soldier. And she ended up in Cornwall, England. So Martin Whalen. So there's still a few left in Ireland here, you see, in 1835. So Martin Whalen will cross over eventually. So it's when I used to teach history in grade 7, 8, we talked about the concept of chain migration, which means that you have a family that comes in, and then a couple of years later, members of the same family or neighbors come as well. So this is a good example of what chain migration is. So after 1835, Martin and Anne will move to Canada as well. Did they speak Irish? Okay, I'm just a little bracket here. I remember mentioning that last time. I just came upon this little bit of information which could be totally useless because we really don't know. But the Dawsons I mentioned that went on to live in Montana, in 1920 census, there's by the way, the US Census is incredible. It has a lot of information, and it goes up to 1950. So one column here mentions mother, place of work, mother tongue of their mother. And it says Irish. It's not nationality, it's mother tongue. So, I don't know, did they make this up? Like the elopement story, or is it true? I don't know. So that's information that we have there that, well, it's interesting. So we have John William Dawson and his brother Thomas Dawson. I'll talk about them a bit later. Just because somebody mentioned Lannon. I talked about Joseph Lannon last time, so I'm not going to talk too much about him. But he's not related with the Lannons still living in the quartier. He was the owner of the Boston Red Sox. And of course, he's very famous. You can Google him. But he always was proud to say that he was from Lac Beauport, Quebec. And he was the owner of the Boston Red Sox. There's a lot of controversy. He's the one who acquired some baseball guy named Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth, yeah. So I don't know if he's the one responsible for selling him to the Yankees, though. He is? Okay. I kind of forgot his story because I came upon it first. Now, I just added this up because this was from L'Écho du Lac, the newspaper from Lac Beauport, but it's dead. It hasn't been published since 2018, so kind of sad because I wanted to start publishing articles there as well, but it's no longer. So anyway, the Lannons, there's no Lannons left. One of his descendants wanted to retrace the route he made by train. Joseph Lannon traveled by train because back then there was a train connecting Quebec City to the border of Vermont and New Hampshire. But his descendant walked it because he wanted to, well, it was kind of a, I don't know, Santiago de Compostela move or something. So, yeah, so Joseph Lannon was a famous son of Lac Beauport, and on his monument, his plaque at the cemetery, it's written that he was born in Lac Beauport. So he's a proud son of Lac Beauport. Okay, I remember mentioning last time about the wives who were abandoned. In 1871 census, 2 Dawson women, it's written abandonnées par son mari. But rest assured, they did. In 1880, we found both Dawson daughters with their husbands in Pine, Montcalm County, Michigan. Pine County, Montcalm County in the middle of Michigan, back in the middle of Michigan. So they lived there until their dying days. So rest assured, they were abandoned, but I guess what happened is that see what happened, this actually is part of the whole story of St. Brigitte's, that the husbands probably left quite a lot for the logging industry. They went up the river Montmorency, they went to Trois-Rivières, they went further west. And then around those dates, 1870, 1880, something happened in the USA. First of all, they defeated the First Nations, which opened the land up for others to go to Montana. But also the establishment of the railroad, all the way to Omaha and all the places west of the United States. And then they discovered this land in Michigan and Wisconsin. I'll show you a map later on, where it's just wood. So they went there and cut wood. And once the wood, all the forests were cut down, well, they established as farmers or as mill workers in the wood industry. So it kind of explains why they were abandoned, because the husbands left and they didn't know if they were going to come back or whatever. I don't know what happened in between 1871 and 1880, but somehow both daughters, Ellen and what's her name? Anna? No, not Anna. Mary Jane are with their husbands and they have kids. So they're fine. And one sister went to join them, but she didn't marry, Anna. So that's the William Dawson and Sarah Keogh that we mentioned before. The Berryman family is another important family. And I did an article about how they became Irish, because they were on the Waterloo settlements, named Waterloo Settlement, because 2 of the major settlers of Lac Beauport, St. Dunstan, are James Berryman and Peter Simons. They were both members of the military and the British. There is no indication, contrary to what is written in different places, that they participated in the Battle of Waterloo, but they did participate. James Berryman participated in some of the battles in Spain, Salamanca, Vitoria, and the Pyrenees, just north in the Basque Country. So there's documents about that. Where he came from, we don't know. He could be from Killeray in Ulster, in County Derry, but he was a Protestant, and it's written in the census. But what happened then when they married an Irish Catholic woman? Well, the kids were raised, most of the time, especially if it was in a Catholic environment, they were raised as Catholics. So that's how the Berryman became Irish Catholics by marriage with Ellen Kilty. So they're in Quebec City, both of them in 1829, Simons and Berryman. So they're involved in the establishment of St. Dunstan. So even though the Berrymans are very well known in St. Brigitte, they were originally in Lac Beauport. But they also occupied some of the lands that was like on the border of both communities. Now, Peter Simons did not marry an Irish Catholic woman like James, so his descendants are, well, I don't know today. It's not the same. So the son of James had two sons. David married Julia Foran from Sainte Brigitte de Laval. We mentioned the Forans before, so he moved to Sainte Brigitte de Laval. Whereas James married Catherine Berrigan from St. Dunstan, and he stayed in St. Dunstan. So you had the two Berryman families, and they probably met at the lake. And they lived further up north in Sainte Brigitte, and there was a house there for a long time. Now, just to mention briefly, if you do a search on Berryman, you will see that two of the descendants, Ed and I can't remember his name, were very highly competitive athletes in cross-country skiing. Cross-country skiing was a big thing in Sainte Brigitte de Laval back then, and the Berryman family was the nucleus of that, was the center of that. And it almost seems like maybe they could have participated in the Olympic Games of 1940, if there had been Olympic Games in 1940, I don't know. But that was like to say that they were competing around 1936, 1938, and of course there were no Olympic Games in 1940. So that's James Berryman. So these are his kids. I'm going to talk about one of his daughters a bit later on. I still have time, or yeah, just going to make this quick. Okay, I mentioned William Chadgett before, so I won't talk to him again. This is where we have the Tipperary settlement, Lac Beauport, and there's a school. So it's really like a school. Wow, what's the school doing there? But forget it, the school never really happened. It was all a big project that finally went down the drain. So this is Chadgett. So yeah, I talked about him before, so it's okay. The Dawson Ranch, yeah, the Dawson Ranch, that's interesting. There's a huge ranch in Montana in a place called Cold Springs. There's an article in the New York Times, if you want to go and read it some other time. It's really interesting. I don't know if this is going to open. Maybe not. Okay. Anyway, you can click on, oh, no, the link is not complete. Anyway, you can click on it, and it's also on the blog de la Société d'Histoire de Sainte-Brigitte de Laval. So they ended up, the two brothers in Montana, and they established well, we could call it a dynasty. They went on for a long time, and there was an article in the LA Times. And it's really interesting because in the article, he mentioned that his father came from Quebec. He went around, prospecting, doing odd jobs all over the place. And then finally, he had land in Boulder Valley, kind of where Idaho and Wyoming meet. And so you have more family there, more cousins to discover. Okay, for some reason it's the whole, anyway. So that's the Dawson family in Montana. Oh yeah, that's interesting. Darby Dawson, He was born in Ireland, if we remember that name before. We saw that. He married a Protestant girl, and of course, the family became Protestant. They moved to Peterborough, which is the heart of Ontario back then. But I just found it interesting. In 1903, he came back to St. Brigitte de Laval after living his whole life in Peterborough, and he was buried in 1903 in the cemetery that is no longer there. Another Dawson family moved to Saint-Romuald pretty early on, so they all became workers at the docks there, or the not the shipbuilding factory, the shipbuilding in Lausanne. So some Dawsons were involved in that trade as well. Now this is the map I was talking about. You see, Michigan and Wisconsin is completely forested back then in 1850s. That's from 1860. Forgot to put the date, but it's from the 1860s. So we have a lot of the men from St. Brigitte who will move to these areas in the logging industry. Some of them actually we don't know, because some names appear. Like there's a Philip Dawson, the brother of the two women I mentioned before. He was an agent, so we don't know what happened to him. So a lot of men probably moved there and were lost in the records. So that was a main attraction. And it was easy to get there because the railway traveled all the way from Quebec City, Detroit, and then you could go on into Michigan and Wisconsin. And it was attracting for these young men looking for work, you know. There's not a lot to do in St. Brigitte. Oh, I just wanted to mention a link with the O'Connor family, John O'Connor. One of the descendants from William Thorne and his daughter Belinda Ann married Daniel Ryan, and their son Philip John Ryan married Pitsy O'Connor, which is a name I remember seeing in my family history in one of the pictures. I think one of the pictures I scanned from the family had Pitsy O'Connor on it. So they had no kids, so there's no descendant. But just a little nod to John here, who was also one of the persons who really inspired me to do this work. Now another family from St. Brigitte in St. Dunstan, Mary O'Brien, who's related to my family, married John Gibson from St. Brigitte. They lived on Champlain Street, and you know the story of Champlain Street. It's a lot of things happened there. In 1875, there was an avalanche. This is not the famous disaster of 1889, which killed a lot of people. This one was a smaller scale disaster. So two families were wiped out. Mr. Abelan and John Gibson, Mary O'Brien et al., and their 5 kids. The Hayfield family, okay, go through this quickly. I'm related to the Hayfie through my ancestor, Catherine Hayfie. All the Hayfies moved to Upper Gatineau Valley, except one, John Hayfie. He seemed to, I don't know if it's him or the priest or whatever, somebody had a problem writing Hayfie properly. It became Hiffy, Hilfie. Eventually it became Hayfield. And then I typed Hayfield in Quebec City, and Les Pompes Hayfield was a fairly well-known company in Limoilou. And this picture from Limoilou, Société d'Histoire de Limoilou, shows the Hayfield pumps. They built pumps, all kinds of pumps, including gas pumps, I guess. And so I don't know, they have a lot of descendants here, including Diane Hayfield, who was one of the first female sports announcer on TV for RDS. When RDS started, Diane Hayfield was one of the first ones to be a member of the team. So I haven't contacted them yet. I have not been able to contact them yet, or I haven't made the effort to contact them yet, but I will one day, because I have no clue if they know really where they come from, because they're called Hayfield, and connection is not easy, but they are definitely related to the Hayfie, that is 100% sure. Okay, there's a lot of pictures on the Facebook page of Société d'Histoire de Saint-Brigitte de Laval, so you can go there and see a lot of them. Of course, a lot of them are about the Dawsons. It was called Dawson Town for a reason. So this is Kate Dawson, who married Albert Valliere. Her mother, Margaret Crowe, is in there. And you have other Dawson relatives. So yeah, there's quite a few pictures, including the one that was on the Facebook page for this presentation. A few things that I found interesting. A lot of the Irish, married French-Canadian women when they went to New England. And a lot of divorces happened once they got to the US. A newfound right for women. They could sue for divorce or apply for divorce. And it happened. Not a lot. Last thing, Jean-Paul Arnay. He's a descendant of the Berryman family. Some of you, or most of you here, are probably old enough to remember Jean-Paul Arnay was the precursor of the NDP in Quebec. He ran for the NDP. He was elected once in Parliament in the 1980s. He became the chief of the NPD Quebec, provincial party, which was not successful back then. So I guess today he would be, well, he lived until actually he died in 2021. So he did see the rise of the NDP in Quebec. So he must have felt a bit of pride in that because he did participate in it. So he's a descendant from the Berryman family. She married William Paul. His last name was Paul, not Harney. I don't know where Harney came from, but they were called Paul, and then eventually became Harneys. And they also worked at the shipbuilding in Lausanne, which could explain the background for Jean-Paul running for the NDP. And oh, actually, that's it. There we go. Check out for more. Okay, the website is, okay, I don't know what happened there. The website got sidetracked. But if you could check the Société d'Histoire blog, I think this one will open. Do you want to this app to make changes? No, don't make changes. So, yeah, I encourage you all to go and look there. I'm translating all the articles I'm doing. Oh no, you can't see that. Okay, it's on freeze. Okay, forget it. Anyway, you can check this website, Société d'Histoire. And, oops, I don't know what I did. Okay, you can read that later. I just want to remind you, you're more Scottish than you think. I did my DNA, and I'm more Scottish than Irish. Of course, that is explainable by my mother, but even on my father's side, there's 13%. So, yeah, it's all a mix. And finally, Kenneth Dawson, whose father is someone here, we're a 6th degree related. So I just wanted to add this at the end. So Kenneth Dawson is the father of someone here. Roger O'Brien is my father, so this is a connection with the Heafies. Okay? So there's a Mary O'Brien. She married John Hurley, married John Dawson, married Patrick O'Neill. Of course, Millie O'Neill is pretty well known, St. Brigitte de Laval. And her son is Kenneth Dawson, and I think there's some Dawsons here. And this is my side of the family. Okay, so thanks, I mentioned it before. And there we go, that's Kenneth Dawson, right there. So you can see that later. This is Alan Dawson, who's the president of the Société d'Histoire St. Brigitte de Laval. You can see that later. This is the Berryman family. This is the Jennings family. And this is County Tipperary. And this is a connection I made with all the hamlets I mentioned before. So they're all pretty close. And this is my family. So I don't know, the Scots could be here, the Bakers, the Cullens, I don't know what these names are. Duggart, yeah. So there we go.